Good morning, students. This is third part of the chapter Enemy from Vistas. We all know very well that this chapter, in this chapter, the story is set during the Second World War. A Japanese doctor named Sadao finds an American prisoner of war at his doorstep. He is in dilemma that being a doctor, should he save the wounded man, or being a Japanese, should he hand over the enemy to the army? So here we have come to know the story opens at the house of Dr. Sadao Hoiki, a highly successful Japanese surgeon and scientist who had studied medicine in America. We all know very well. And first of all, the writer has introduced the main character of the Sadao and Dr. Sadao Hoki's father. We all know very well that Dr. Sadao's house was situated on the coast of Japan. He had been living there since his childhood. The house had a low height and was made of stone. It was set upon the rocky beach, which had a boundary line made with pine trees that were tilted towards one side. Fine. And we all know very well that since his childhood, his father would point towards the islands and would say that those were the stepping stones towards the future of Japan. It means his father used to say that future had no limits. It depended on mankind how it shaped its future. Then we have come to know that Sadao now lived there with his wife Hana, their two children, and several servants. So here now we have come to know, later on we have come to know that Sadao retained all the things that his father would tell him as a child. His father never joked with him. And his father was sent to America at the age of 22. At the age of 22, he was sent to America to study surgery and medicine. And he returned at the age of 30. Before dying, Sadao's father saw Sadao become famous not only as a surgeon but also as a scientist. Sadao was on his way to discover a treatment for wounds which would make them absolutely clean. So we have discussed up to here. Then we have come to know that the story's setting is World War II, and World War II was going on. But still Sadao was not sent. He was not sent abroad with the armed forces as a doctor. Why? Because he was retained in Japan. Only, as the old journal of the Japan was suffering from an alignment which needed to be operated upon in case of an emergency. So now today we will start from the paragraph clouds were rising from the ocean now. We have to start from the paragraph clouds were rising from the ocean now. The unexpected warmth of the past few days had at night drawn heavy fog from the cold waves. Sadao watched Miss Hyde outlines of a little island near the shore and then come creeping up the beach below the house, reading around the pines. In a few minutes, fog would be wrapped about the house too. Then he would go into the room where Hana, his wife, would be waiting for him with the two children. Fine. But at this moment, the door opened and she looked out a dark blue woolen haori over her kimono. She came to him affectionately and put her arm through his as he stood, smiled and said nothing. He had met Hana in America, but he had waited to fall in love with her until he was sure she was Japanese. His father would never have received her unless she had been pure in her race. He wondered often whom he would have married if he had not met Hana, and by what luck he had found her in the most casual way, by chance, literally at an American professor's house. The professor and his wife had been kind people, anxious to do something for their few foreign students, and the students, though bored, had accepted this kindness. Sadao had often told Hannah how nearly he had not gone to Professor Harley's house that night. The rooms were so small, the food so bad, the professor's wife so voluble, but she had gone, and there he had found Hannah a new student and had felt he would love her if it were at all possible. So now we will understand here what does the author mean to say over here. Actually, the writer describes that on that day when a prisoner of war was you can say found lying ashore, the writer described the scene outside Dr. Sadao's house as the days were unusually warm and the sea waves were cold. At night, you can see over here the nights become foggy. Doctor saw the boundary. Doctor Sadao saw the boundary of a nearby island became invisible gradually as it got covered in the mist. Slowly the mist was coming closer to him. Soon there would be mist all around his house, and at that time he would go back into the house to his wife Hannah, who was waiting for him along with their two children. But at this moment, suddenly what happened? Before Sadao could go inside, the door opened and his wife looked out for him. She was wearing a dark blue colored gown over her dress. She lovingly crossed her arm. She lovingly crossed her arm. Okay. With his smile at him, remained silent and stood by him. Means now both of them were just pondering over their past. They had met in America. Sadao knew that his father would marry him to a Japanese girl only, and so he ensured this before falling in love with her. Fine. He knew very well that his father would never give permission to marry in other caste. Okay. Sadao and Hannah had met in America at Professor Harley's house, but were married with the approval of Sadao's father only after they returned to Japan. Fine. So many times Sadao would often tell Hannah that it was a mere coincidence that he went to Professor Harley's house on that day. Okay. Why he did not want to go over there? Because that night, as in his house were small rooms, the food was not good, and the professor wife was very talkative. Still, if he had not gone there that night, he would not have met Hannah. At the time, Hannah was a new student. Sadao had thought that he would love her if it at all it would be possible for him. Sadao and Hannah loved each other even after having two children. After many years of marriage, they had not married in America. Okay. In a haste in America, rather they returned to Japan, sought permission from their parents, and then they got married in a traditional Japanese ceremony. Fine. Suddenly, what happened? That it was at this moment that both of them, at this moment. Fine. So we have to start from that paragraph. So now see over here, both were pondering on their past, and it was at this moment that both of them saw something black coming out of you can say, or out of the mist. Fine. So out of the mist, see over here, we can see over here. It was at this moment that both of them saw something black come out of the mist. It was a man. He was flung up out of the ocean. It seemed to his feet by a breaker. He staggered a few steps, his body outlined against the mist, his arms above his head, then the curled mist hid him again. So that moment, what happened? That moment they saw a figure. Come out of the mist. Fine. It appeared black in color due to the mist in the air. The outline of the man's body was visible in the mist. He walked unsteadily with his arms above the head. It was an indication that he was a prisoner. The man walked a few steps and then disappeared in the mist. So, who is that? Hannah cried. Who's that? She dropped Sadav's arm and they both leaned over the railing of the veranda. Upon seeing the figure, Hannah reacted by asking that who was that. She took her arm out of Sadav's arm and both of them bent forward over the railing of the veranda to have a closer look at the man. They saw him again. They saw him again. Fine. And he was crawling on his hands and knees. Then he fell on his face and kept on lying there. Probably he had fainted. A fisherman, perhaps. Sadav said. A fisherman, perhaps. Washed from his boat, he ran quickly down the steps, and behind him Hannah came, her white sleeves flying. A mile or two away on either side there were fishing villages, but here was the only bare and lonely coast. Fine. So dangerous with rocks. The surf beyond the beach was spiked. With, you can say, rocks. Somehow the man had managed to come through them. He must be badly torn. So over here we can say that as the area had villages near his house, the area had villages full of fishermen. Sadav said that probably it was a fisherman who had been washed off his boat. Sadav ने कहा शायद ये कोई fisherman है, शायद अपनी बोट से आ गया, मीन्स बह के आ गया है. He ran to help him. Hannah followed him. The loose leaves of her hair flew as she ran. This part of the coast was not inhabited as it had dangerous rocks on it. So you have to note down this point कि यहाँ कोई भी नहीं रहता है. Why? यहाँ कोई क्यों नहीं रहता है? बिकॉज ये जो एरिया है ये बहुत ही क्या है, कवर्ड विथ शार्प पॉइंट. स्पाइक विथ रॉक्स मीन्स कवर्ड विथ शार्प पॉइंट. समहाउ द मैन हैड मैनेज टू कम थ्रू दैम. ही मस्ट बी बैडली टॉर्न. Okay, fine. So they saw when they came toward him that indeed it was so. The sand on one side of him had already a stain of red soaking through. He is wounded. So now exclaimed. He made haste to the man who lay motionless, his face in the sand. An old cap stuck to his head, soaked with white sea water. He was in wet rags of garments. Sadav stopped Hannah at his side and turned the man's head. They saw the face of white man. Hannah whispered. Yes, it was a white man. The wet cap flew away, and there was his wet yellow hair, long as though for many weeks it had not been cut. And upon his young and tortured face was a rough yellow beard. He was unconscious and knew nothing that they did for him. So now we will see over here when both of them reached over there to help. They rushed down to help him, and they thought that he might be a fisherman. Okay. And as the Japanese couple saw the man, they realized that he was badly injured. The sand on which he lay had blood stains on one side, which indicated that he was wounded. But suddenly what happened? Sadav said that man was wounded. He approached the man who lay motionless with his face buried in the sand. Okay. And when they turned him over, however, they realized that he was not Japanese. And Sadav noticed that his yellow hair, okay, his yellow hair, an old cap hung on his head. It was soaked with the sea water. His dress was also wet and torn. Sadav turned his turned the man's head. As they saw the face, Hannah spoke confidently that he was a white, that is an American man. But at that time, so thou noticed that the man had a bullet wound and was bleeding profusely. So we can see over here, the injured man was an American. Okay, as his cap fell off, they saw his wet yellow hair, colored hair, which had not been cut for a long time. He was young. His face had such marks which indicated that he had been tortured. He had a rough and capped yellow colored beard. As he had fainted, he did not know of presence of Sadao and Hannah. Okay, fine. Now we can say over here that both of them were pondering what to do with that man. Yes, it was a white man. Yes, it was a white man. The wet cap fell away and there was his wet yellow hair, long as though for many weeks it had not been cut. And upon his young and tortured face was a rough yellow beard. He was unconscious and knew nothing that they did for him. Now Sadao, being a doctor, remembered the wound, and with his expert finger he began to search for it. Blood flowed freshly at his touch on the right side of his lower back. Sadao saw that a gun wound had been reopened. The flesh was blackened with powder, sometime not many days ago. The man had been shot and had not been tended. It was bad chance that the rock had struck the wound. Oh, how he is bleeding, Hannah whispered again in a solemn voice. The mist screened them now completely, and at this time of the day no one came by. The fisherman had gone home, and even the chance beachcombers would have considered the day at an end. What shall we do with this man? Sadao muttered. So now over here, what has happened? Sadao was reminded that the man was wounded. Okay, as he had seen what? Blood stains on the sand. As he was a doctor, he moved his trained fingers around the man's back to search for the wound. He felt blood oozing out of the wound in a lower part of his back. It was a gunshot. Okay, the man had been injured a few days ago. Fine, and he had not got any medical help to treat the wound, as he had himself used some black colored powdery substance on it. Okay, so now Hannah Hannah was concerned that the man was injured and said in a low voice that he was bleeding. Now what has happened over here? That what shall we do with this man? That both of them were in this dilemma, that Sadao and Hannah contemplated throw him back into the sea, or should they save him. So now both of them were in this dilemma, and in my next class I'll explain you that what would be their call. Okay, what would be their call? Because first reason, they could not help him at the very first. Why? Because he was an American, and moreover he was a prisoner of war who had escaped. So for today I have completed up to here, and tomorrow I would like to start from the para, that what would be Sadao and Hannah's call. What would be Sadao's and Hannah's call on white man. Thank you. Have a nice day.